They say you always remember the exact second your body realizes something is wrong, not because of noise or flashing lights, but because everything inside you tightens at once like your instincts are whispering before your brain catches up. And yeah, that's exactly how it started for me. Late afternoon, long stretch of road, my daughter asleep in the back seat with her shoes kicked off and her teddy bear tucked under her chin. The kind of quiet moment you don't think twice about because it feels earned. You know what I mean? I'd had a long week. Nothing dramatic, just life, and I was humming along to the radio thinking about what we'd eat for dinner when I saw red and blue lights bloom in my rearview mirror. Slow at first, then closer, brighter, unavoidable, and my stomach dropped even though I knew I hadn't done a single thing wrong. I checked my speed, perfect signals, fine registration, current still. I pulled over carefully, gravel crunching under the tires, engine off windows, down hands resting on the steering wheel like I'd been trained to do since I was old enough to drive, because some lessons get passed down whether you want them or not. My daughter stirred and asked why we were stopping, and I smiled and told her it was nothing. Just a police officer doing his job. Go back to sleep, sweetheart. Everything's okay, even as my jaw tightened, because part of me already knew this wasn't about my driving. He took his time getting out of the cruiser, sunglasses on, even though the sun was dipping low, slow, walk confident, like the road belonged to him. And when he reached my window, he didn't say hello or ask for my license. He leaned in, chewing gum, and asked whose car this was. Not curious, not polite, more like he'd already decided the answer didn't matter. I told him it was mine and asked why I was being stopped, and he smirked, looked me up and down, and said he didn't know. Guys like me could afford something like this. And there it was. Not shouted, not explicit, just sharp enough to sting the kind of comment that carries a lifetime of assumptions packed into a single sentence. I asked again what the lawful reason for the stop was. Slower this time, and his face changed. Surprise sliding into irritation because he wasn't used to questions. He was used to compliance, and he told me to step out of the vehicle while his hand drifted a little too close to the taser on his belt. My daughter sat up fully, then eyes wide staring at the weapon, and her voice cracked when she said my name, and something inside my chest burned. I told him not to pull that out in front of my child, my voice calm but colder now, and he didn't like that at all. Out. Now. I moved slowly, narrating every motion, seatbelt off, door open, standing up into the cooling air, because I knew silence could be twisted into anything if someone wanted it badly enough. He shoved me against my own car harder than necessary. The metal cold against my cheek told me to spread my hands, and when I said he was violating my rights, he laughed and said he smelled marijuana, a lie so old it might as well have been printed on his notepad. My daughter was crying now, full sobs, and I told him she was 6, that there were no drugs in the car, and he didn't respond, just keyed his radio and called for backup, describing me as a resistant suspect, and yeah, that happened. For a split second, I thought about ending it right there, telling him who I was, pulling out credentials that would have flipped his world upside down, but I didn't, because men like that don't calm down when they realize they're wrong. They panic, and panic makes people dangerous, especially when a child is involved. So I stayed quiet and let him keep digging. He cuffed me too tight and shoved me into the back of his cruiser, and before the door slammed, I looked him in the eye through the mesh and told him to remember this moment, because in about 20 minutes he'd wish he'd handled it differently, and he laughed like I'd just told a joke. From the back seat, I watched him walk to my car, pull on gloves, and then I saw the small plastic bag already in his hand, and my blood went cold because I knew exactly what was coming before it happened. He glanced around quickly, carelessly, then opened the door and dropped it onto the passenger seat. And that was the moment everything crossed a line, because this wasn't harassment anymore. This was a felony unfolding in real time. What he didn't know was that my car had cameras everywhere, quiet, always on, uploading every second to the cloud. And what he didn't know was that the watch on my wrist wasn't just a watch. And when my heart rate spiked and the vehicle stopped suddenly, a signal went out without me touching a thing. I didn't call for help. Help was already on its way. Another cruiser arrived, an older officer this time. Tired eyes, cautious posture, and I watched him look at my daughter crying in the back seat, then at the baggie on the seat, and I could tell something didn't sit right with him. He picked up my wallet from the hood, opened it, and froze, his face draining of color as he walked back toward the first officer, telling him he needed to look at something, and the response was immediate denial. Loud, aggressive, insisting it was fake, because once someone goes that far, the truth feels like a threat. Then the radio crackled, not local, clear and calm, telling all units to stand by because federal authority was inbound and weapons were to be dropped. And before anyone could even process that, the sound hit us deep and rhythmic, rotor blades cutting the air, as a black helicopter dropped low over the road. Dust swirling lights slicing through the dusk, followed by heavy SUVs pulling in fast doors, flying open before they fully stopped. Suddenly the world was full of voices that didn't ask. Hands were raised, lasers painted red dots across uniforms, and the older officer dropped to his knees immediately, while the first one stood frozen, disbelief written all over his face. Someone opened the cruiser door and asked if I was injured. The cuffs came off. Blood rushed painfully back into my hands, and I stood up straight, rolled my shoulders, took one deep breath, feeling the fear drain out as authority settled back in where it belonged. I gave clear, controlled orders: secure the vehicle, get my daughter out first, keep her away from him, and she ran to me, arms tight around my neck, sobbing into my shoulder, while I whispered that it was okay, because this time it finally was. They showed him the footage on a tablet, every move in high definition, every lie exposed, and he watched his own hand plant the evidence, his mouth opening and closing with nothing left to say. They arrested him with his own cuffs, and I didn't smile or yell, I just watched, because the real work was only beginning. That stop wasn't an accident, it was a pattern, and patterns leave trails, and trails lead to truth. Over the next months, records surfaced, dozens of arrests, where cameras conveniently failed lives, derailed scholarships, lost years, stolen, and in court he looked smaller than I remembered, shaved head, orange jumpsuit, no swagger left alone. The judge didn't raise his voice, didn't need to, when he said this wasn't a good officer making a mistake, but a predator hiding behind a badge, and the sentence that followed was long enough to make the room exhale like it had been holding its breath for years. One case reopened that day belonged to a young man who'd lost everything. Because of him, evidence-matched DNA told the truth. And when the chains came off in that same courtroom where lies had once locked them on, I watched a mother cry tears that sounded like prayer. And that moment stayed with me longer than the helicopter or the arrest ever could, because justice isn't about punishment. It's about restoration. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked how it felt, and I didn't give them a slogan. I told them the truth, that a badge is a shield, not a sword, that power doesn't make you right, accountability does, and that cameras, like truth, don't blink. That night driving home, my daughter asked from the back seat if the bad man was in timeout, and I smiled and told her yes, a really long one, and she nodded, satisfied, and went back to sleep, while I watched the quiet road ahead, thinking about how close the world comes to breaking sometimes, and how much it matters when someone decides not to let it. So here's what I want to ask you honestly. If you were in that moment, scared, judged, pushed into a corner, what would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet, spoken up sooner, or just hoped it ended quickly? And how many people never get the chance because no one was watching? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Challenge me if you disagree. Share a story if you've lived something similar. And if you believe conversations like this matter, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because justice doesn't work unless we're all willing to look straight at it.